For 60 years, attention has been focused on the conspirators who planned, organized, and executed the assassination of President John Kennedy in Dealey Plaza. They have largely gotten away with their crime. They have gotten away with murder. But they have also gotten away with a second murder, and the framing of an innocent man to take the blame for their cowardly and traitorous actions. They have ruined the name and legacy of a young man who served his country with a vigor and dedication few have matched. That young man is Lee Oswald. Let's look at the actual life and accomplishments of Lee Oswald up until the time of his murder when he was only 24 years old. By stepping back and viewing his life, it is possible to contrast his actions with those of the cowards who would shoot him down in the basement of the Dallas City Jail. 1. Lee Oswald was a true patriot, trained in intelligence and dedicated to working for his country. Oswald enlisted in the United States Marine Corps on October 24, 1956, just 1 week after his 17th birthday. His primary training was in radar operation, which required a security clearance. In May 1957, he was granted final clearance to handle classified matter up to and including confidential, after careful check of local records disclosed no derogatory data. This is important as the Warren Commission and many so-called journalists paid under the CIA's Project Mockingbird will use Oswald's rough upbringing to chastise him as loveless and try to portray him as troubled. He was no more troubled than any other youth living in poverty and trying to exist without a father, and he was extremely intelligent. At Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, Oswald finished 7th in a class of 30 in the Aircraft Control and Warning Operator course, which included instruction in aircraft surveillance and the use of radar. He was given the military occupational specialty of Aviation Electronics Operator. On July 9, 1957, he reported to Marine Corps Air Station El Toro in California. And it was at El Toro that the CIA recruited top candidates for their clandestine operations. These young Marines were perfect. They were young, dedicated patriots who were already cleared for top security operations. The Warren Commission states that when Oswald was in the Marines, he taught himself Russian. That assertion is ridiculous. How many 17 and 18-year-old new Marines who are busy trying to achieve a confidential classification in radar and aircraft surveillance have time to teach themselves a language as difficult as Russian? Lee Oswald was identified as very bright and sent just up the California coast to the Monterey Language School, where he was taught Russian and became indoctrinated by the CIA for missions abroad. Most members of the Warren Commission, and especially former CIA Director Allen Dulles, knew these facts about Oswald, but chose to denigrate his name, reputation, and innocence by fabricating a fictitious lone nut theory surrounding him. 2. Oswald's defection to the Soviet Union was planned and executed by James Angleton, Chief of Counterintelligence for the Central Intelligence Agency. Angleton was the undisputed champion of clandestine intelligence operations, and just one of the operations he ran was a fake spy program. Oswald had been groomed for just this operation from the time he learned Russian at Monterey Language School. He was instructed to lay groundwork for his interest in the Soviet system. Remember, Oswald had security clearance up to confidential and was working on radar systems at Atsugi Air Base in Japan that tracked the top-secret U-2 spy aircraft. Angleton and his CIA hoped they could dangle the prospect of radar secrets to the Soviets as an enticement to accept Oswald as a real defector. Every indication is that the Soviets never bought the story. On September 11, 1959, he received a hardship discharge from active service, claiming his mother needed care. Oswald spent only 2 days with his mother in Fort Worth, then embarked by ship on September 20th from New Orleans to France, and immediately traveled to the United Kingdom. Why would Oswald have been granted an early discharge if he were not preparing for his fake defection? Arriving in Southampton, England on October 9th, he told officials he had $700 and planned to stay for 1 week, but on that very same day, he flew to Helsinki, Finland. There were no commercial flights on October 9th to Helsinki. Oswald had to have traveled via military or CIA transport. He was issued a Soviet visa on October 14th. He left Helsinki by train the following day, crossed the Soviet border, and arrived in Moscow on October 16th. The CIA also arranged for their paid operative, journalist Priscilla Johnson Macmillan, already in Moscow, to interview Oswald in Russia. This will be the same journalist that will later be called before the Warren Commission to help detail the lone nut description of Oswald. She will then go on to write a book about Marina and Lee Oswald that again fits perfectly the lone nut scenario. 3. Oswald could never have been welcomed back into the U.S. with open arms if he was a real defector. In March 1961, Oswald met Marina Prusakova, a 19-year-old pharmacology student. They married 6 weeks later. Her uncle worked for Soviet domestic intelligence, and questions later would be raised about whether Marina herself was an agent. Oswald and Marina applied at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow for documents that enabled her to immigrate to the U.S. just 1 week later. 1 week. The U.S. Embassy gave Oswald a repatriation loan of $435.71, and Oswald, Marina, and their infant daughter left for the United States. Does it make any sense that Oswald would be allowed back into the U.S. almost immediately and given a loan if he was a real defector? The CIA will report they never bothered to interview Oswald. Of course that is a lie. And for decades, nearly every fact that the CIA will report about Oswald, including in Mexico City and the weekend of the assassination, will be a lie. Why the Central Intelligence Agency to this day withholds critical documents about their relationship with Oswald speaks volumes. If he was truly a lone nut shooter, the CIA would have revealed everything they possessed about Oswald immediately after Dealey Plaza. Oswald was also given a job at Jaeger, Charles & Stover, a photographic firm that contracted to make highly classified maps for the U.S. Army. A job he could never have gotten without the confidential clearance he earned, and a job at the Riley Coffee Company, a CIA front company in New Orleans. Does this sound like a true defector to Russia? 4. Oswald was given a new assignment and new handlers, George de Mohrenschildt and Ruth and Michael Payne. De Mohrenschildt reached the United States in 1938. The British intelligence services warned the American government that they suspected he was still working for German intelligence and was pro-Nazi. In 1939, he went to work for Humble Oil, a company that was co-founded by Prescott Bush. De Mohrenschildt befriended Oswald and provided him money and other resources while he was handling him, including taking Oswald to anti-Castro meetings in Dallas. De Mohrenschildt was making sure Oswald went where the CIA wanted him to go and did what they wanted him to be doing, even if Oswald himself was not aware of his manipulation at the time. De Mohrenschildt was rewarded by the CIA with a lucrative contract with an oil deal he was negotiating with Papa Doc Duvalier, the Haitian dictator. In March 1963, he got the contract from the Haitian government. De Mohrenschildt handed off Oswald to Ruth and Michael Paine, who would handle Oswald from the summer of 1963 until Kennedy's assassination a few months later in November. I have produced a presentation titled The CIA and Mrs. Paine. They had a thing going on that I encourage you to view to see just how CIA connected the Paines really were. Michael was also the stepson of the inventor of the Bell helicopter and worked with confidential clearance at the Bell helicopter plant in Fort Worth. It was Ruth who would invite Marina and her children to live with her in Dallas. Ruth that would get Oswald the job at the Texas School Book Depository. Ruth that will find the letter supposedly linking Oswald to the General Walker incident. Ruth that will miraculously find another trove of materials to link Oswald to Mexico when there was real doubt about him even being there. And her estranged husband Michael, who takes Lee Oswald to no less than 6 political meetings in October and November 1963 rather than spend time with his children. It will also be in Ruth and Michael Paine's garage, weeks after the assassination, that an Imperial reflex camera will miraculously show up in a duffel bag owned by Lee that had already been searched. The FBI will first try to hide Michael Paine's Minox spy camera and then admit he owned it. 5. Oswald was seen all around New Orleans with Guy Bannister, David Ferrie, and Clay Shaw the summer of 1963. The Warren Commission and their paid journalists actually expected us to believe that there was no credible evidence that Oswald, Ferrie, and Shaw knew each other in New Orleans. Nothing could be further from the truth. Oswald was first seen in Jackson, Louisiana, about 10 miles west of Clinton. He went into a barber shop for a haircut and also to ask about any jobs in the area. The barber, a Mr. McGahey, suggested the state mental hospital. What he and his 2 escorts did not know was that the civil rights group CORE had scheduled a voter registration rally for that day. Many people now saw the trio. Some of these witnesses were re-interviewed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and the committee found them quite credible. Witnesses like William Dunn and Henry Clark identified the 2 other men with Oswald as Clay Shaw and David Ferrie. Eventually, Garrison had 13 witnesses he thought were worthy of trial appearances. Oswald was next seen at the Jackson State Hospital. Receptionist Bobby Didon directed him to the personnel office. 3 witnesses, Maxine Kemp, Aline Woodside, and Dale Booty, later saw his job application. When Jim Garrison tried to subpoena it, he was told it disappeared. While Oswald worked at Riley Foods, a CIA front, he accompanied Guy Bannister to college campuses for right-wing recruitment events. Bannister was the former FBI station head in Chicago and assistant superintendent of the New Orleans Police Department. Oswald also worked out of Bannister's offices at 544 Camp Street, right in the middle of intelligence service addresses in New Orleans. Oswald pretended to be pro-Castro to spy and infiltrate their organizations and memberships. Oswald and Bannister also stored arms and ammunition in the offices and distributed it to anti-Castro Cubans at paramilitary camps at Lake Pontchartrain. Oswald also assisted David Ferrie in the care of mice and supplies for Dr. Mary Sherman of the Ochsner Clinic in her work to produce a fast-acting cancer virus to be used as a method of assassination of Fidel Castro for the CIA. 6. Lee Oswald most probably saved John Kennedy's life in Chicago on November 2nd, 1963.
Kennedy was supposed to arrive at O'Hare Airport on Saturday, November 2nd at 11:40 a.m. he was to attend the Army Air Force football game at Soldier Field. But on Wednesday, October 30th, the FBI told the Secret Service in Chicago that a plot was afoot to kill Kennedy there.
There were actually two tips that reached the Secret Service in the week before JFK's trip here to Chicago, and we'll soon see that the two were interrelated. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover reported the first tip. Hoover's information was that at least one hit team with high-powered rifles would attempt to shoot the president from a warehouse or office building overlooking the president's motorcade route that coming Saturday. An FBI informant named Lee provided the information. And yes, the Lee providing the tip and probably saving JFK's life that weekend may well have been Lee Harvey Oswald. It was a tip from an FBI informant named Lee that alerted Hoover to the Chicago plot. And we know that Oswald was indeed a paid informant for Hoover's FBI. But it gets even more interesting. Just about the exact time JFK is scheduled to visit Chicago, half a world away in Vietnam, South Vietnamese President Diem and his brother are murdered in a CIA-sponsored plot. False CIA cables sent from Washington seemingly give Kennedy's okay for the assassination, even though he has ordered the CIA multiple times not to proceed in their request to kill Diem. Here is famed CIA agent E. Howard Hunt later testifying before a congressional committee about the false cables.
Just that I might be able to improve upon the record.
And what did you understand him to mean when he said to improve upon the record?
To fabricate cables that could substitute for the missing chronological cables.
Did you in fact fabricate cables for the purpose of indicating the relationship of the Kennedy administration and the assassination of Diem?
I did.
And did you show these fabricated cables to Mr. Colson?
I did.
They thought that they could get away with it as they expected Kennedy to also be murdered in Chicago the same day. Please view my video presentation on the Chicago plot for detailed information about how President Kennedy had to cancel his trip to Chicago due to active shooters on the motorcade route.